You can always tell where a corporate retreat is going to crack before the vans cool down. 12 years of guiding wilderness team builds and teaching the same safety modules to new lanyards have given me a private taxonomy that's less about job titles and more about which part of a person moves first when the radio stutters. Some lean forward to be helpful on the record. Some fold inward to become policy. Some turn to the window because trees don't grade you. Give me a ferry crossing and I can name the one who will cry when the night sinks its teeth. This group fit the pattern, just newer fleeces, sharper phones, and an upgraded legal department. We left before the gulls were fully awake, the water under us hammered flat and dark as a coin that's been handled for generations. The Orpheus Archipelago is a scatter of spruce islands and basalt ribs that doesn't look like a thing the map got to finish labeling. The fog there arranges itself like handwriting nobody teaches anymore. The place pretends to be a postcard until the glass hums under your fingers and you understand there's another face on the other side. I did my talk as if words could lay down rail ahead of us: water purification, food storage, what scat belongs to what mood, why slick ravines make you polite, how we move, efficiently and safely, in a place that doesn't care about either. I say it flat so it counts. Dar. Rowan Price, project lead, counted along with me like the forest was a math problem and she could fix it with enough digits. Precisely how many minutes at this elevation, she asked, and precisely how many iodine tabs for this volume, and precisely what spacing between hikers to minimize slip risk on mossy substrates. Evan Holt filmed the whole thing with a polite relentlessness that said a camera made him feel like less of an intrusion. Albie Skinner found a way to file complaints against the weather, the ferry, the coffee, the person who had invented moss, and the concept of dampness as a culture. Ben Yates mouthed something like a prayer and watched the tree lean the way people watch ovens when something might boil over. I logged them: helper, documenter, complainer, penitent. Add one more I didn't have a drawer for yet: the leader who hated needing anything. By mid-afternoon the sky decided to be iron. Rain came down in thin bars and the light turned surgical. That's when Rowan's breath started to saw, the tendons in her neck jumping like wires with current. Panic is an animal that hates witnesses. I walked her off the trail to a flat bench above Raven Creek with my hands open and my voice low, approaching as if from the side because panic has blinders. She hated the sit, hated that I saw it, hated that human bodies veto Harvard degrees. I told her to fix her eyes on a cedar frond and breathe when it moved. There was a point where color came back into her face like a tide deciding to return. I wrapped a thermal blanket around her shoulders and left her a phone and a chocolate bar she could pretend she found herself. I followed her boot gouges downslope to scout the creek edge for a campsite I could sell to the rest as if the plan had always been this. On paper the clearing was right, water close but not invited into the tent, windbreaks that didn't aim trees at us, high ground without arrogance. In the air it was wrong. Some places feel like rooms that have just watched an argument and haven't picked a side yet. Every guide learns to listen for non-sounds, a pressure in the head that makes your molars hum, a quiet that feels like something holding its breath back. I stepped into the open, and that hum ran through me from teeth to ankles. The ferns were still unbending. That's how I knew the tracks were fresh before my eyes did the inventory. The impressions were long where they shouldn't be, narrow where no weight would stay honest, too deep for the sponge of that soil. The stride called for mass, enormous, but the geometry refused all the animals I know by name. Bears don't write their feet that way. Moose don't step like a disagreement. Humans don't weigh like that without machinery. I put my palm next to the cleanest print. I covered half and wished for smaller hands. Moisture pooled and ran along the edges as if the ground was grateful to be let up again. Something creaked in the high limbs. Every instinct I owned told me not to look up. When you look up you volunteer to remember. I backed out the way you leave a bad dog to its sleep, steady, apologetic, projecting the lie with your spine so it doesn't have to be said out loud. By the time I reached Rowan I had the lie with a brand name. Black Bear, I told her. Territorial. We're pulling back to the boats. The words fit my mouth like a mouthguard, too tight but protective. On the trail the lie grew legs and a plan. I radioed the assistant manager and told the rest we were in standard wildlife protocol. We moved as if a bear was behind us because the alternative has no manual. Holt filmed rain slicing the light into walking fences. Skinner complained that my concern was performative. Ben whispered the Lord's Prayer like a password that maybe still worked in old systems. I counted the silence between woodpecker taps and informed it that it would not become footsteps. We reached the dock at last light, tide low and mean. Twice I saw a wrongness in the slick boulders beyond the kelp line, nothing in the water, but something using the water as a tool. Twice I told myself angles tricked me, my headlamp dramatized shadows, storms lend personality to rocks. I called the service pier and declared emergency evac due to aggressive wildlife. That language files properly in other people's systems. The deckhand said a night ranger would meet us with forms and a shrug. He was only half right. Pete Nolan wears a mustache that makes him look tired even when he's not. We'd shared rescue coffee before. He took my report without stepping on the lie. He stamped a closure on the trail and stared out at the water like a person who has heard a note and is waiting for the second one to see if it matches. Weather's about to get righteous, he said, which in Ranger means the island's going to try something. My clients folded around a space heater like penitents at a red altar. I drove them to the rental lodge, explained refunds in a voice I hoped sounded professional instead of relieved, and went back to the pier because I don't sleep early after a lie, even a useful one. 2 days later a man slid into my diner booth and set an envelope on the sticky table. He had a teacher's hands and a guide's eyes. Name's Adrian Vale, he said. Biologist. Used to guide out here before I got smart. He pushed the envelope over like a snake's skin, expecting me to flinch and not wanting to be right about it. The prints on the cheap paper puckered where fog had tried to erase them. Trees, distance, a geometry in between that wasn't blur so much as refusal. My brain tried to round it toward bear, man in ghillie, machine. The angles did not cohere on purpose, like the picture knew where attention fails and used the seams. July, Vale said. Different company. Same script. Same evacuation story. He tapped a seam that might have been joint or hinge or idea. They've been here a long time. Bears have been here a long time, I said, because inertia is easier than belief and I am paid to uphold the former. Vale slid a scrap with a FOIA case number across the formica like a priest giving absolution. You'll get a polite nothing, he said, but the reply proves you asked. It helps to show you wanted the truth, even if the truth can't be checked out by mail. I didn't agree. I bought him pie, and we talked ourselves down to the parts that felt like bones. He told me about closures that never made the paper, teams with budgets that didn't line up with any public program, maps that lost arguments with the land they were supposed to describe. I told him about the tracks and about not looking up. We didn't get a week before the thing tried town. The call came in as large animal inside limits, which can mean moose, bear, or a person in a mascot suit with bad decision hygiene. I knew the dispatcher's voice. She doesn't make jokes with that tone. I drove toward North Arm with the defroster losing and the radio chewing static into metal filings. Lodge roads braided into neighborhoods, mailboxes, tricycles, a chain-link backstop at a school diamond. At the far edge, the spruce wall had a new hole, too deliberate for wind and too rough for a truck. Beyond it branches rehearsed how to be trees more convincingly than trees usually need to. Men in dull canvas moved through backyards with cases that hummed rather than clanked. A woman in a dark shell stood with her shoulder mic tilted just so, watching the tree lean the way you watch a pot right before it chooses to boil over. "You keen?" she asked without looking. Sarah Malik. Northern Wilderness Service. Stay in your truck. If you see anything, you didn't. Houses held their breath. A kid in a Superman t-shirt pressed his face to a window while his mother's hand cupped the top of his head like she could push him back inside by the hair. The canvas men set up tripods and speaker cones and cases with hazard tape that didn't match any hazard I had a name for. Their talk was mostly clicks, short, useful syllables that made the air feel competent. A neighbor raised his phone and lowered it again because some part of him remembered that some pictures know how to follow you home. The first note they made was lower than thunder and higher than fear, a pressure under the ribs that made my molars ring. Birds lifted out of the black spruce like a stain shrugged off a tablecloth. The trees at the cut edge shivered. Then something very big moved away from the diamond and the houses, retreating not like losing but like line editing, choosing a cleaner way to say itself. 2. Hold pressure until the target crosses the green belt, Malik said. 3. Begin restoration. Restoration meant erasing. Footprints turned into wind-throw scars under gloved hands. Crushed grass became mower tracks. Gouges in bark read as growth cracks and were sanded into truth. A man pulled a hank of long hair from a low branch with tweezers and fed it into a furnace the size of a lunch pail. Another sprayed a mist that made my nose remember pennies. The humming boxes shifted their song and the pressure lifted like a hand off a bruise. "Impressive," I said when Malik finally let herself look at me. She peeled off her gloves, each finger making a soft pop. "We've had practice," she said. "Your client's safe. For now." I almost added until the next retreat. "What do I tell them?" "You tell them the truth they can use," she said. Bear. Storm. Deadfall. The kind of truth that keeps them from walking into the wrong clearing. We handle the rest. "Do you kill it?" I asked, and found I already feared the answer. "Would you?" she said, leaving a pause big enough to walk around in. We redirect. We contain. We try not to teach anything worse than us that we are worth hunting. After they pushed it back into the trees, the island reset like a trick practice to be invisible. The ferry horn rode its long line under the fog. Gulls argued over a bag as if the world were only tide and trash. Pete came by the diner and didn't sit, he touched the back of my booth, nodded once, and left. Vale texted me a chain of numbers that didn't belong to anything I could safely search. I tucked the FOIA number into my wallet where an old photograph used to live. The company's HR called with a smile welded into her voice. Could I provide a polished incident summary for their records and a list of gear upgrades to prevent similar events? Liability likes new helmets when the problem is a cliff. I wrote about bears because you can purchase products against bears. I left out the part where the air learns your name. At night in a rented room above a laundromat in Anchorage, I watched the city turn into its windows. Light made soft squares like the last language we have that isn't a lie. Street lamps burned holes in wet pavement. Somewhere across the cold water, on an island that resists being named by mouths that aren't its own, something old was doing the arithmetic of us, testing fences, counting steps, measuring how long our attention holds before we call what we saw something else on purpose. Rowan called late once with the voice she uses when she has stopped being correct. "What did we almost walk into?" she asked. "Trouble with teeth," I said. "But you handled it." She was quiet for a while. "I hate needing help," she said. "I know," I said. "Breathing helps anyway." She thanked me like the word had edges and hung up. Evan sent a private link titled "Bear" with comments off. I didn't click for a day. When I did, the video was rain sawing a trail and the back of my head and an empty clearing that had the feeling of an afterimage, like a mirror sometimes reflects a room behind you you don't recognize and never find again. The lens caught intent without catching its owner. I closed the tab and let my heart find its idol again. If the story ended there, it would be a kindness. The island is not a kind narrator. 3 weeks later I took a different company with the same script to a different island with the same kind of clearing. We smelled rot where rot had no reason, a sweet metal drift that didn't belong to deer or fish. I found a crow tangled in fishing line and cut it free, and the bird left a single black feather in my glove like a receipt. On the second night, something walked the perimeter of our camp without showing a light. The next morning, saplings along the creek were bent as if rehearsed. I told them storm, I told them the wind can braid when it's bored. Evan didn't argue because this was a different Evan, a new documenter with the same certainty that pixels make you safe. I was learning to tell the truth you can use without resenting the truth that won't be kept. I met Malik again in a place that pretends to sell bait and gasoline and actually sells permission to ignore the bigger machine. She leaned against a rack of lures and made a joke about the color names and then asked if I'd come out on a night operation as an unpaid observer. No photos, no notes, no locations named aloud. I said yes because saying yes felt like admitting I'd already been drafted. They staged from a maintenance shed behind a shuttered campground. The team worked like people who knew each other in situations where names aren't helpful. They had rules written into muscle memory: don't look up if the pressure goes sharp, don't speak if the radio shifts below hearing, don't touch anything that looks like it ought to make you bleed but hasn't yet. "Why don't you carry rifles?" I asked. Malik shook her head. "Guns teach two bad lessons at once," she said. "They teach our people that you can end this with a trigger, and they teach the other side that the trigger is a language worth learning." She tapped the box that hummed. Acoustic geometry. Pressure gradients. Hurting without teaching. We moved through a stand of spruce so old the ground under them felt like a wet mattress. The boxes sang where you felt the notes in your inner ear rather than heard them with your outer one. The forest reacted like it remembered being bigger. At one point the sound slid wrong and the pressure spiked and I could feel the space above me gaping like a mouth. Every part of me wanted to look up. I didn't. Something large moved in a way that made the trees seem embarrassed about their vocabulary. We angled it toward a gap in the basalt and eased it through trees that tried not to be broken while being broken. "We can't keep this up forever," a man behind me murmured. Malik didn't turn. Forever is not a measurement. Today is. In town the next morning, a greenhouse exploded without exploding. The panes were all intact, but every plant inside was bent the same direction, as if obeying a single sentence. People on the island called it a microburst because we are generous with words that mean nothing but get the insurance paid. Vale met me behind the grocery with a thermos of coffee and a laminated map marked with squares drawn in dry erase. "Closures that never made the paper," he said. 36 minutes. 5 hours. A day and a half. Not long enough to become a story. He pointed to a creek name that had been revised twice in 10 years. When you rename a place too often, what lives there learns it can take the label off. "What do they want?" I asked. Vale looked at the dumpsters where the crows held their parliament. "It's a bad question," he said. "Want is a human verb. If you insist on it, you'll invent answers that make you feel necessary." The next time I saw Rowan, it was in Anchorage in a lobby that tried to look like a forest with money. She was carrying a conference tote full of papers that were never going to breathe again. She looked at me like the islands had followed me into the carpet. "You didn't tell me the worst part," she said. "Which one?" I asked. "That the lie is kinder than the truth," she said, and then she was gone into a seminar with slides about resilience. I started keeping a notebook I never wrote in. It sat in my pocket as a promise to a future version of me who might be brave enough to betray a couple of necessary secrets. Some nights I took it out and opened it and looked at the empty page and understood that an empty page is not neutral. It accuses you or absolves you depending on what you meant to put there. The old men at the harbor have their own files. I learned this when one of them, a person who has been crab-shaped since Reagan, handed me a coffee and said, "Your bear walked past the West Breakwater at 2 in the morning, and then laughed into his thermos." 2 skiffs turned tail at once. Good seamanship. He wasn't being brave or cruel. He was filing a weather report in the language available to him. If you are waiting for the part where it takes a person, here is the shape of that waiting: it turns everyone you love into a lighthouse you check too often. I woke at 3 to the wrong silence and scrolled my phone to prove that every dot was still where it belonged. I counted fairy horns. I learned the names of storms that never made landfall. I walked past a poster stapled to a telephone pole about a missing cat with a black tail tip and tried not to think about leverage. The island tried a different grammar in late autumn. It started in the cannery where the new owners were teaching old machines new insults. A kid pushing a mop saw something in the high windows and went home with a headache that never arranged itself into a sentence. In the woods behind the baseball diamond, a group of teenagers found a perfect circle of flattened blackberry cane and swore it was aliens because aliens are the word you use when the adults in your life have used up the word bear. Malik's team put up sawhorses and left a truck where people could see the logo because sometimes the truth you can use is that someone else is at the wheel. That night I dreamed about the clearing where I didn't look up. In the dream I did look up, and there were eyes, but the eyes were the sky and the pupils were the spaces where the trees left room. I woke with my heart arguing with my chest. I wrote the dream down in the notebook I never used and then tore the page out and burned it in a coffee can. The ash made a mark on my palm like a stamp that didn't belong to any country. It is customary in stories like this to offer rules, the kind of bullet points that keep the comments tidy. The island doesn't love rules, but there are practical notes that don't make things worse. Don't look up when the pressure goes sharp. Don't leave food that smells like family. Don't step over a line of stones that points at a creek mouth. Don't say a thing's name at night if you learned that name during the day. Don't take a feather you didn't pay for. Don't rely on cameras to tell you the truth you already have in your teeth. Don't put a light where you wouldn't follow it. Don't assume the sound of children playing is always attached to children. Don't repeat a whistle back exactly. Don't tell a story in the woods that ends with a scream. It's not that the island will punish you for breaking these. It's that you might accidentally teach the wrong student. The company that loved feedback loops came back in winter with fewer people and better boots. They wanted the archipelago to be a mirror where they could practice confidence. I took them to a ridge that looks like a spine and tried to teach them how to move with the wind instead of against it. On the way down, our trail crossed someone else's trail, and for a while the two paths walked together like strangers pretending to have always been married. We split where the basalt rose like a knuckle. I didn't tell them what I saw in the mud because by then I had learned how many truths a day can carry before it drops you. Rowan stayed after and asked to see Raven Creek one more time. This time, she said, I want to look. The bench was the same. The ferns had decided to forgive wind again. The clearing felt like a room that had been aired out. Rowan put her hand out and closed it on nothing. If I'd seen it, I would have broken, she said. If you'd seen it, I said, you would have kept breathing anyway. You did before. She shook her head. That's your job, she said, to make resilience sound like a choice. It snowed that night, the kind of snow that falls without announcing itself, so the morning looks like a confession. The fairy horn wrote a softer line. The world felt briefly like it wanted to be quiet the way a tired child wants to be good. The tracks we found near the South Marina were wrong again, but wrong in a new dialect. Something had learned how to distribute weight in a way that spared the crust. The prints were only obvious where it paused to decide. There is something terrible about a pause that big. Malik's team arrived with different cases, darker metal, deeper hum. Upgrades? I asked. She didn't answer. The operation was slower, more like handwriting than song. They drifted it away from the water, herded it through a stand of alder, and let it go where the basalt opened its mouth. We're teaching the wrong lessons, one of the techs said, almost to himself. We're teaching it that we move when it pushes. Malik didn't argue because arguing would have made it truer. Vale took me to a bar that used to be a church and we sat in a booth under a framed net with floats that looked like rosary beads. You could leave, he said. You don't have to be the person who holds the door and talks. I thought about road maps that end at reasonable cities and jobs where the most dangerous machine is a printer. There are other doors, I said. They'll be held by someone who knows less. He sighed like a rope being hauled in. That's the trap, he said. That's how we stay. In late winter, the island tried the school again. It was after hours. The playground was a shape in snow. Someone called because they saw a shadow that didn't attach to anything. I arrived first by accident and parked where I could see the chain link and the swings and the place where the forest makes a promise it always keeps. There were prints that were almost prints. The pressure in the air had a taste like cold metal and old pennies. I stayed in the truck because I had learned that being brave is often the same as being stupid, just with better PR. When Malik's team arrived, she knocked on my window and said, "Tonight you stay in the cab." I said, "I know." She said, "Say it again." I said, "I'll stay in the cab." They set the boxes in a horseshoe and sang a shape through the metal fence. The snow lifted without wind and settled in a different arrangement, as if the world had changed its mind about the location of white. I felt the thing attend. I don't have better language. It knew we were singing at it and not to it. It moved sideways, as if two dimensions had made a friend with a third just for the weekend. One of the boxes coughed and died and the pressure spiked and every part of me strained to look up. I watched my hands instead. They were steady on the steering wheel the way a person's hands are steady when they are trying not to cry. Malik swore once and kicked a cable back into place with the authority of a person who knows how to lie to machines. The cough cleared. The song found its shape again. The pressure eased like a debt forgiven. Something large moved away into the trees with the offended dignity of a creature that doesn't acknowledge doors but uses them anyway. In the morning the principal asked me what happened and I told her the truth she could use. "Wind found a trick," I said. "We unfound it." She nodded like people nod when what they hear fits in their calendar. She put a sign on the fence about temporary closure due to maintenance and kids pressed their faces to the gaps and asked each other if maintenance was a monster you could beat in a video game. Maybe it is. I wish I could say we learned enough to win. Winning is a bad verb for this work. What we do is keep the day intact. What we do is count breaths and make sure the numbers come out even. I guided. I filed reports. I told bear stories that file correctly in other people's systems. I met Malik in places that smelled like gasoline and wet rope and learned to tell when she wanted coffee and when she needed quiet. I kept Vale's map in my glove compartment and pretended it didn't make a noise when the truck hit bumps. I became the person island kids wave at because their parents told them I'm the one you ask if you get lost. I tried not to get lost myself. Spring is when the islands pretend to forgive us. It's also when the forest grows its softest leaves to hide the oldest teeth. A tour group from a bank that names stadiums wanted sunrise photos from a headland where I don't take people because the basalt there spits back at cameras. Money rented a permit anyway and hired me as a fig leaf. We went in just before dawn with the kind of silence that sounds expensive. I could feel the pressure go wrong before the first tripod opened. I turned them around on a story about a cliff that had collapsed last week. The cliff had not collapsed last week. The part of me that keeps accounts with things I can't name felt like I'd paid a good bill on time. That afternoon Malik called without hello. "Your bank people," she said. "How many?" I told her the number. "You turned them," she said. "Good." I asked if something had happened. "Not to them," she said, "and then, we lost one." She meant a box. She did not mean a person. I said I was sorry the way you say sorry to someone for weather. "It's okay," she said. "The island returns what it wants to keep. We only borrow." Rowan sent me a paper she'd written about group dynamics under perceived threat. It was good science and bad weather. The words, unknown externalities, did a lot of work heavy enough to bend their stems. I read it in a laundromat while my clothes turned and a kid cried because the change machine ate his quarter. I liked the part where she admitted that leadership is often a performance that keeps other people calm enough to do the real work. I circled the phrase, containment narrative, and then blacked it out with a pen because sometimes you don't want to see certain phrases in your pocket. I thought for a while that the island had forgiven us the way a cat forgives, by forgetting you individually and remembering the species. Then came the night it stood outside my window and didn't knock. I woke to that precise silence and knew it was looking through the glass not because I felt watched but because the air around my skin behaved like it had been given instructions. I stayed still. I kept my eyes on the ceiling where a stain maps a sea I'll never sail. The pressure throbbed. The building settled a fraction of an inch as if listening between breaths. Across the alley, someone's TV showed a weather map in colors that can only mean there will be anchors holding microphones while the wind steals their hats. Somewhere far away a dog barked at a thing it loves enough to warn. I waited while the lesson delivered itself. There are nights when being harmless is a skill, not a condition. The pressure eased. The window forgot how to be a mouth. It left without leaving a mark, and the absence of a mark was the mark. When I told Malik, she pressed her hand to the bridge of her nose in a gesture I had come to recognize as the end of her patience with reality. "You're on the list," she said. "There's a list?" I asked. "Not that kind," she said. "Just the kind where the island remembers who keeps the door." I wanted to ask if the remembering was respect or inventory. I didn't because either answer is worse. Vale suggested I take a month and go inland. "Mountains that end," he said. "Lakes that aren't connected by a feeling. You'll remember how to sleep." I told him I didn't want to remember how to be a person who sleeps while someone else holds the door. He looked at me the way people look at boats during storms, with affection and a measure of resignation about design limits. There is a point where telling the truth that can be used becomes a habit that eats part of you and you don't notice until you see what's missing in a mirror. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in the rented room above the laundromat and looked older in a way that wasn't a number. I said out loud, "Bear," and then I said the other word I don't write down, and I watched my mouth make both shapes and understood that one of them costs more breath. On a Sunday in early summer, we ferried out with a group that worked with data the way fishermen work with tide tables. They were earnest and funny and tired in the way people are tired after winning arguments that nobody pays for. We camped on a saddle between two small hills, and the wind braided itself into a rope that sang in the guy lines. In the night a voice like an old radio drifted through the trees saying a name I hadn't told anyone out there. I followed the rule about not repeating a whistle back exactly. I turned the lantern down so it stopped being a destination. I breathed like a person who had never learned to hide breath and somehow, improbably, the voice lost interest because it wasn't a conversation anymore. In the morning the earnest people wanted a rule they could add to their toolkits. "Most of your rules won't fit here," I said. "But quiet sometimes does." By now you have either decided I'm lying or you've remembered a night where something like this touched your life and stepped back just enough that you could step forward. Either way, what happens next isn't proof. It's just the next thing that happened. We were near a ravine that carves a line between the old logging road and the creek, a place where fog hangs like a sentence waiting for its verb. Rowan had asked to walk alone for 10 minutes and I let her because she had earned it. I heard her boots pause and then I heard nothing at all and then I heard the kind of quiet that puts its hand over your mouth. I moved faster than I move when clients are watching because there are speeds that only exist when the story is about to change. I found her standing on the lip of the ravine, looking into a space that had the wrong number of directions in it. She didn't look up. She didn't look down. She looked into, and into looked back. "Don't teach it your shape," I said from a yard away. "Breathe like fog." She did. The pressure braided itself into a rope and tugged once like a test and then unspooled. When it let go, Rowan sagged like a tent when the wind forgets to hold it up. She laughed once and it sounded like a person who had been underwater and found the top. "Bear?" she asked, and I nodded because the truth she could use was the one we both needed right then. After that, the island gave us a season of small mercies. The worst things happened in places where the ground already kept secrets: bogs, old clearcuts, the foundation of a house that burned during a winter nobody remembers correctly. Malik's crew broke 2 boxes and built 3 better ones. Vale got a job offer inland and didn't take it. Pete retired from the service and bought a skiff and named it Last Word and never said why. I taught a class at the community center on reading weather and trees, and 3 kids asked the right questions and one of them asked the wrong question in a way that made me think he would make a good liar for the right reasons. And then, Because the archipelago does not do straight lines, it came back around to the same clearing, the same creek, the same argument with the sky. We stood at the edge with rain trying to decide whether it wanted to be snow. I said the rules out loud, not for the island, which doesn't care about our recitations, but for the parts of us that forget when it helps them to forget. Don't look up. Don't step over the stones. Don't say its daytime name. Don't put a light where you wouldn't follow. Don't make a shape you don't want copied. Don't forget that surviving is not the same as winning. We walked through without incident because sometimes you are permitted to, because sometimes permission is the only thing you ever had. At the far end of the clearing there was a single hair snagged on a twig, long, colorless, the idea of a hair more than hair itself. I didn't touch it. Vale says the island returns what it wants to keep, and I had the sudden, ridiculous certainty that if I took the hair I'd owe it something I didn't understand how to pay. That night I poured one finger of whiskey and watched Anchorage turn back into its windows. I called Rowan and didn't mention the hair. I texted Vale a photograph of the sky. I put the notebook I never used on the table and didn't open it. There are days for brave. There are days for accurate. There are days for being a door. If you need an ending, here is the honest shape of the one I can give. The ferry still writes its line under the fog. The gulls still argue over bags. The service still hums their machines and sings shapes through trees. The island still practices the grammar of us at the edges of our maps. We keep telling the truth people can use and carrying the other truth quiet enough that it doesn't learn our steps too well. Some of us measure our lives in years. Some of us in the number of people who never learn what a forest can decide to be when it is done pretending to be ours. I keep count. I am still at the door. And when the pressure goes sharp, I don't look up. If you love chilling horror stories and eerie mysteries, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us every week for a new descent into darkness. Your next nightmare is just one click away.